Security was quite incredibly tight. I said no, I didn't. I had no idea when the invasion was going to be. I think I was told by my CEO 2 days before the invasion. And I think we all guessed it was going to be that year. And I suppose obviously you guessed it would be in the summer sometime. But nobody knew better nearer than that until the thing. No, security, thank goodness, was very tight, because that was the third disaster that had happened in many invasions, when in most of them, I think the Germans knew exactly when we were coming, where, and exactly what time. This time they didn't, and we foxed them completely over this. This was a critical thing. All through the winter of 43, we trained up in a very lonely Scottish isle in order to how we would do the COPP work out of Nexcroft, which were tiny. At first thing, until you knew what was going on, it was just another appointment. You know, I'd move ships, you were appointed from one ship and another. Most of the time things went happen, some of the times it didn't. Everybody realised that something must be afoot, big. I mean, I think we all guessed, but there were no official. Nobody said it was assumed that there was going to be a big invasion. And we came down sort of mid-January where we were trained. We reckoned we were ready to operate, and there we were under the orders of the command who was doing the invasion.
You leave Portsmouth. Mm-hmm. How long do you know you're going to be at sea for?
It was going to take 2.5 days to get across.
And you're not just going across a placid sailing lake. This is the height of the war. You knew there would be dangers out there.
Well, indeed. And the point was that there were minefields. And, of course, at the end of the day, the minefields are all brilliantly swept. The day before, actually, the D-Day, but of course they weren't swept when we crossed. So we had to go across them because we had a shallow draft. We could go over the top of them on the surface, but not if we were submerged. And of course we couldn't go on the surface at daytime because we would have been seen. So we had to plan the trip. So we went over the surface of the mines during the night at the surface on our diesel. And the rest of the time then had to be by periscope.
What were conditions like on the submarine? Because it's a long time to spend in close quarters with people I'm sure you were friends with, but I'm sure you'd rather have been spending time in close quarters with someone else, perhaps in different conditions.
Well, indeed. I mean, we all knew each other very well because we had trained together, obviously, and we got on very well. Yes, we had drunk beer together and that sort of thing. But we took it in turns to sleep. The boat has a central sort of compartment, which in fact is both the loo and the diving compartment where they're diving, and also the main entry into the boat from the top. So you had to go through that, and ahead of that, to the bows, there was the main battery compartment. So we took it in turns to sleep there. There was one sleeping bag to all of us. So you grabbed that, and obviously it was not the most hygienic thing at the end of the operation, but we used to get about half an hour at a time and go up there. So it was, and then we just chatted away and that sort of thing. I think we were pretty serious lot. We weren't all that jokey, you know.
You arrive at the beaches, or the position off where you're monitoring from, and you look, what do you see of this, what is in the next few days going to be overrun by British and American troops? But when you get there, you're this sole or one of two submarines in enemy waters, you've come over minefields, you look up, what can you see?
Well, after we did arrive, my CEO and I, between us, we got our position dead right. I mean, it's a question of things aboard, things near the coast. I mean, clock towers and special things which we could recognise from the chart. So we fixed our position very exactly, which is exactly where we told we had to be. And then we bottomed with an anchor. We would come up in the day by periscope and look around. And yes, we did once. We had to look on the beach. We did see the Germans playing football on the beach. So we did joke a bit about they didn't know what was going to happen on the morrow.
War is a horrible, horrible thing, and it's the people stories we tend to forget. And as much as we're commemorating the British and the American losses, on the German side of things, you've just seen people, I imagine, probably your age, probably just following orders, kicking a football about on the beach, and you know what's coming, and they do not know what's coming. What emotions did that arouse in you, if any?
Perhaps it brought us up full stop, realising that something big was coming on, because, of course, by then we did know, I suppose, or the next day, when we got the message, the thing was on, that it was something really big coming. It's quite an interesting point you made. I don't think any of us, none of us realised really the vastness of this operation, because of course that's all so incredibly secret, really. Then we got the message, the second message, which said it's on tomorrow, and of course bingo, really. That was the middle of the night. because of the long day, of course, now, in June, very long day, we had to sit on the bottom, you see, for all that time. And during that time, we very nearly ran out of oxygen. And that would have been disastrous because, we couldn't risk surfacing in case if the operation was cancelled for another day, it is giving away the position quite obviously. If Germans sees a military submarine off beach, they've got to assume something's happening, haven't they? Finally surfaced about 05W, I think, 5 in the morning, and put up all our complicated lights and radar beacons and things we had, and I waited for dawn, really. Not the dawn, waited for what would happen.
And as you're waiting there, it must be an incredibly vulnerable position because you've surfaced and you're ready to go, and you don't know whether if at the other end there's a technical hold-up and if the American and the British are coming, and if they're not, you're in a very vulnerable position.
Well, indeed it was, and we did feel very lonely, yes indeed, because there we were, stuck there, yes. First thing we saw, actually, was the arrival of the RAF in force. Suddenly, because it was so silent, first of all, there were we absolutely silent. Of course, all engines stopped. We were just anchored and sitting there. And it had gone much calmer. It had been quite rough up to that point. And then suddenly the RAF arrived, in just terrific strength, and just went up and down the beach, the back behind us, just bombing it up and, all the time. So that was noise. And then there was a big pause, actually, and we wondered what was going to happen. See, we still didn't realise, really, nobody knew the size of the thing. And then, actually, the next thing that happened was our Navy big battleships, which, in fact, were 15 miles out at sea, were firing by radar, of course, onto the beach. And, of course, the shells went over the top of us. We could hear them whistling across. And then there was a silence. It was only then, out of the mist, then the big one really, suddenly, my gosh, there was this and there's no word to describe it. You can't say incredible because, it was there. Just thousands of approaching ships, and there we were. That was the end of the story, as far as we're concerned, because our job was done. In fact, we were then ordered back alongside the control ship.
And when your job is done, what does one do after that? Is it a bottle of beer, a job well done, and what's next? Because you tell it in such a matter-of-fact way, and I think looking back over history, it's such a turning point, but for you it was just a job you trained and prepared for. What was the mood like once you surfaced and you knew your job was done and done well?
Well, immediately, of course, we were very glad because we were all ushered up to the captain's cabin, and we must have been incredibly smelly. And he said, would you all like a bath? And we all had a bath.
Let me ask you about, we mentioned this a little earlier when we were talking, psychologically, Europe has been swept aside by the German forces. Although the Russians are pushing back on their front, this was such a psychological barrier for the Allied forces to overcome, to get this landing right, and the forces had amassed, and if it had gone wrong, who knows how the war could have turned. Did you realise at that point, what a significant thing you had taken part on when you saw emerging from the mist all these troops?
Well, I don't think we did at the time. I do agree that since one reads afterwards, one does realise that it was, do or die. What would happen, as you say? I think you probably know Eisenhower had an emergency letter, didn't he, or announcement which he would have made if he'd had to withdraw. And then what would have happened? Could we have mounted another one? I don't know. And if we can speculate about what would have happened then. But as it happened, of course, it did mean that the French realised for the first time, and this is why this current D-Day is so much bigger in France than with us, because to them it really was obviously, they were convinced that once we landed we would win somehow and chuck the Germans out, and they'd had them bossing them and running their whole country, for 4 long years with the awful business of having the petards who were traitors of their own country. Pretty awful for them.
Sitting chatting with you now, I am a little in awe because of the risks you took, the part in history you played, and I think there's no doubt saying that you were a key part, one of many I'm sure you'd say, but in a crucial part of 20th century history, and yet we sit at your home and you talk very modestly about the first thing you did afterwards was have a bath. Looking back at it now, do you realise what you were part of, and what does it make you feel?
I think now I do, and I think the others do. And of course I'm sad because I'm the sole survivor of those 2 ex-craft teams, actually. So I've got nobody else to talk to about it. I don't think at the time we did. I mean, we were all young men, and we talked about the usual things that young men talk about, like girls and things, And but no, at the time we didn't. But certainly since then, and obviously now one reads and one gets more into history and so on. But one didn't at the time, no.